Did you know that behind the glitz and glamour of Hollywood's golden age lurked a secret world of forbidden films? Some of the most notorious movies ever made were locked away from public view, challenging the strict moral codes of their time. What happened when filmmakers dared to push the boundaries of what America was ready to see? Let's peek behind the curtain at 25 controversial films that shocked audiences, outraged censors, and nearly brought down an entire industry. 1. The Outlaw, 1943, Jane Russell's Dangerous Curves. Howard Hughes's Western epic, The Outlaw, is perhaps the most famous banned film of Hollywood's golden age. Ostensibly about Billy the Kid and Doc Holliday, the movie's real star was Jane Russell's breasts. Hughes, an aviation engineer, even designed a special cantilever bra to maximize Russell's assets on screen, though Russell later admitted she found it too uncomfortable and didn't wear it. When Hughes submitted the film to the censors in 1941, they were shocked by the film's blatant focus on Russell's figure. The Production Code Administration demanded cuts to reduce the emphasis on her cleavage, but even after Hughes reluctantly trimmed about 30 seconds, they remained unsatisfied. Distributor 20th Century Fox threatened to cancel their release agreement, which would have cost Hughes millions. In a brilliant marketing scheme, Hughes deliberately stirred up controversy by having his publicists call ministers, women's clubs, and conservative organizations to alert them about this lewd film that would soon be released. The resulting public outcry created enormous demand. When The Outlaw finally hit theaters in 1943, it played to packed houses despite lacking the Production Code seal of approval. The film faced legal battles and bans in many cities, but Hughes's outrageous publicity campaign turned controversy into cash, proving that sometimes the best advertising is moral outrage. 2. Babyface, 1933. The film that strengthened the code. Barbara Stanwyck stars in what might be the most brazenly amoral film of the pre-code era. She plays Lily Powers, a young woman who's been prostituted by her father since age 14. After he dies in a brewery explosion, she takes the advice of an old man who introduces her to Nietzsche's philosophy. Use men to get ahead. Lily heads to New York and proceeds to sleep her way to the top of a banking corporation, seducing increasingly powerful executives on each floor of the building. The original version of Babyface was so shocking that even before the code was fully enforced, Warner Brothers was forced to make significant cuts and reshoot scenes. In the original ending, Lily gets away with everything and keeps her ill-gotten gains. The censored version adds a moral ending where she loses her money and learns the value of true love. For decades, only this watered-down version survived until film archivists discovered the uncensored original in 2004. Babyface became one of the key examples cited by moral crusaders demanding stricter enforcement of the production code. Its blatant portrayal of sex as a tool for advancement and its initial lack of moral punishment for the protagonist represented everything censors feared about Hollywood's influence. After films like this, the Production Code Administration tightened its grip, and such explicitly immoral behavior wouldn't be seen again in Hollywood for decades. 3. Freaks, 1932. The film that killed a director's career. Todd Browning had just directed the massively successful Dracula with Bela Lugosi when MGM gave him the green light for his dream project. Freaks used real circus performers with physical disabilities to tell a story of betrayal and revenge within a sideshow community. The cast included individuals with microcephaly, dwarfism, legless and armless conditions, and other visible differences, people who were typically exhibited as human oddities in traveling shows. When MGM executives first saw Browning's finished film, they were horrified. Test audiences reacted even worse. One woman reportedly threatened to sue, claiming the film had caused her to miscarry. The studio panicked and cut nearly a third of the original footage, reducing the film from 90 minutes to just over an hour. The most shocking scenes, including the original ending showing the full transformation of the villainous trapeze artist into a human duck, were removed entirely and are now lost forever. Despite the cuts, Freaks was banned in the United Kingdom for 30 years and rejected by numerous American cities. The film's commercial failure destroyed Browning's career, and MGM quickly disowned it, practically hiding it away for decades. Only in the 1960s did Freaks find new life as a cult classic, appreciated for its sympathetic portrayal of its unique cast. What once destroyed a director's career is now considered a landmark film that challenged how disability is portrayed on screen. Ecstasy, 1933. The first. Fourth banned import. Long before she became Hollywood star Hedy Lamarr, the Austrian actress Hedwig Kiesler starred in this Czechoslovakian film that scandalized the world. Ecstasy features the 18-year-old actress swimming nude and running through the countryside without clothes. But what truly shocked audiences was a scene where the camera focused solely on her face, during what was clearly meant to be an orgasm, making it the first non-pornographic film to depict female sexual pleasure. When Lamarr's husband at the time, Austrian ammunition manufacturer Fritz Mandl, discovered what she had done, he tried to buy and destroy every existing print of the film. He reportedly spent over $280,000, millions in today's money, trying to suppress it. His efforts failed, but U.S. Customs seized Ecstasy when importers tried to bring it to America, making it the first film officially banned by the U.S. government for its sexual content. Years later, after Lamarr had escaped her controlling husband and established herself as a Hollywood star under a new name, Ecstasy continued to haunt her. The film was smuggled into the United States in the late 1930s and shown in art houses, with promoters explicitly trading on Lamarr's new fame. Even as she gained recognition for her incredible intellect, she co-invented a frequency-hopping technology later used in Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. The film's notoriety followed her throughout her career, reducing her accomplishments to that single scandalous scene. 5. Tarzan and His Mate, 1934. Jungle Fever. The second film in MGM's Tarzan series, starring Johnny Weissmuller and Maureen O'Sullivan, pushed boundaries far beyond what audiences expected from a jungle adventure. O'Sullivan's costume as Jane was already revealing by 1930s standards, but Tarzan and His Mate took things much further. The film implied that the unmarried couple slept together, showed Jane sleeping in the nude, and most controversially, included a 4-minute underwater ballet sequence where Jane swims completely naked with Tarzan. MGM actually filmed 3 different versions of the swimming scene, one with Jane fully nude, performed by Olympic swimmer Josephine McKim as O'Sullivan's body double, one with her topless but wearing a bottom, and one with her in her regular jungle outfit. Different versions were sent to different markets depending on local censorship standards. The fully nude version was considered lost for decades until it was rediscovered in the 1990s and restored to home video releases. Tarzan and His Mate was one of the last major films released before the strict enforcement of the production code began in July 1934. The film's cavalier attitude toward nudity and premarital cohabitation became a perfect example of why moral guardians demanded tighter controls. In subsequent Tarzan films, Jane's costume became progressively more modest, and any hint of sexual impropriety was removed. The film was banned in several countries, including Nazi Germany, which objected to showing a Nordic man in brutal surroundings. 6. The Sign of the Cross, 1932. Sex and Violence in Ancient Rome. Cecil B. DeMille, known for biblical epics that mixed religious themes with titillating spectacle, outdid himself with this pre-code shocker. Set during Nero's persecution of Christians in ancient Rome, the film uses its historical setting as an excuse to show sadistic violence, nudity, and sexual perversion that would never have been permitted in a contemporary setting. The film's most notorious scene features Claudette Colbert taking a bath in donkey milk, with strategic camera angles barely preserving her modesty. Another sequence shows the emperor's wife, played by Empress men, as the camera lingers on her sultry expressions. The arena scenes depict Christians being eaten by crocodiles, attacked by gorillas, and threatened by a nude female dancer. When the film was re-released in 1944, a full decade after the production code was enforced, numerous scenes were cut. DeMille even added a new framing sequence showing modern bombers flying over Rome to give the film a patriotic World War II connection. For years, only this censored version was available until film preservationists restored the original cut. The film demonstrates how filmmakers used historical or biblical settings to sneak controversial content past censors, arguing it was educational rather than exploitative. 7. Convention City, 1933. The Film That Vanished. Sometimes called the Holy Grail of lost pre-code films, Convention City is a comedy about salesmen attending a wild convention in Atlantic City. The film reportedly featured rampant sexual innuendo, implied orgies, heavy drinking during Prohibition, and women in revealing clothing. Warner Brothers' promotional materials promised 400 of the world's most beautiful girls in a drama of 1,000 delicious thrills. The film was so outrageous that after the production code began being strictly enforced in 1934, Warner Brothers decided it would be impossible to edit it for re-release. According to film historian Mark A. Vieira, Jack Warner ordered all prints and negatives destroyed, writing in a memo, "We must put our house in order, and the only way to do it is to burn everything we have done." No known copies of Convention City survive today, making it perhaps the most famous lost film of the era. All that remains are a few production stills and contemporary reviews. According to those who saw it, the film was the final straw that convinced moral guardians to demand strict enforcement of the production code. Had it been less shocking, perhaps Hollywood's self-censorship might have remained more relaxed, altering the course of American cinema for decades to come. 8. Red Dust, 1932. Heat in the Tropics. This steamy romance, set on a rubber plantation in Indochina, stars Clark Gable as the plantation manager caught between two women. A brassy prostitute played by Jean Harlow, and the refined wife of an engineer played by Mary Astor. The film features one of cinema's most famous bathing scenes, with Harlow lounging in a rain barrel, clearly nude, but with the water level strategically placed. Red Dust openly acknowledges the sexual attraction between the characters and makes it clear that Harlow's character trades sexual favors with Gable's for shelter. The film also shows Gable and Astor engaging in an extramarital affair without any moral punishment. When the production code was enforced a few years later, such casual treatment of adultery and prostitution became impossible. The film was remade in 1953 as Mogambo, again starring Gable, but now with Ava Gardner and Grace Kelly in the female roles. The remake had to significantly alter the story to meet code requirements, turning Harlow's prostitute character into a showgirl and adding dialogue to make it clear that the adultery is never consummated. The comparison between these two versions perfectly illustrates how the production code sanitized Hollywood's portrayal of sexuality for decades. 9. The Story of Temple Drake, 1933. Southern Gothic horror. Based on William Faulkner's controversial novel Sanctuary, this film stars Miriam Hopkins as Temple Drake, a Southern belle who is kidnapped and sexually assaulted by a gangster named Trigger. The film attempts to disguise the rape with creative camera work and symbolism, including a famous corncob scene from the novel that's merely hinted at, but the implication was clear enough to horrify censors. Paramount Studios tried to make the film acceptable by having Temple ultimately find redemption through confession and punishment. But religious groups were still outraged. The Catholic Legion of Decency specifically cited Temple Drake when establishing their film rating system, which threatened to boycott morally objectionable movies. The film was effectively buried after the production code was enforced, and even Paramount seemed embarrassed by it. For decades, it was nearly impossible to see, with no VHS or DVD releases. Only recently has it been restored and made available to scholars and film buffs. The film's treatment of sexual violence, while tame by modern standards, was considered so shocking in 1933 that it became a prime example of why Hollywood needed stricter self-regulation. 10. She Done Him Wrong, 1933. Mae West's Double Entendres. Mae West built her career on sexual innuendo and double entendres, and this film, her first starring role, features some of her most famous lines. Playing a saloon singer who sets her sights on a mission director, Cary Grant, West delivers suggestive dialogue like, "Why don't you come up sometime and see me?" with a knowing wink that left little doubt about her intentions. She Done Him Wrong was a huge box office success, saving Paramount Studios from bankruptcy during the Depression. However, it and West's follow-up I'm No Angel became prime targets for moral reformers. Will Hayes himself reportedly told studios, "We must have no more Mae West pictures." When the production code was enforced, West's style of comedy became nearly impossible. Her later films were heavily censored, with every line scrutinized for possible double meanings. The Production Code Administration even banned the trademark West hip-swinging walk. West's clash with censors demonstrated how effectively the code could neutralize an artist whose entire persona challenged conventional sexual morality, showing that censorship affected not just content, but could target specific performers. 11th. Scarface, 1932. Glorifying gangsters. Howard Hawks' gangster film starring Paul Muni was loosely based on Al Capone's life, depicting the rise and fall of an ambitious, violent criminal. The original version included shocking violence for its time. 22 people are killed on screen, sometimes in graphic ways. It also implied an incestuous attraction between the gangster and his sister, played by Ann Dvorak. Even before the production code was strictly enforced, Scarface faced censorship problems. The New York State Censorship Board rejected it, and producer Howard Hughes had to make changes, including adding a new moralistic ending and changing the title to Scarface, The Shame of a Nation, to emphasize that the film didn't celebrate criminal behavior. Despite these changes, the film remained controversial enough that Hughes eventually withdrew it from circulation. For decades, Scarface was difficult to see legally, available only in poor-quality bootlegs or rare Film Society screenings. Its disappearance exemplified how effective Hollywood's self-censorship could be, as powerful producers sometimes chose to suppress their own controversial works rather than face ongoing criticism. Only in the 1970s did the film return to regular circulation, by which time its once shocking violence seemed tame by comparison to modern gangster films. 12th. Island of Lost Souls, 1932. Mad science and bestiality. This adaptation of H.G. Wells's novel, The Island of Dr. Moreau, stars Charles Laughton as a mad scientist who creates human-animal hybrids through vivisection. The film's depiction of animal cruelty, torture, and religious blasphemy, with Laughton playing God to his creations, outraged censors and audiences alike. Most controversial was the character of the Panther Woman, played by Kathleen Burke, whom Dr. Moreau creates as his masterpiece and attempts to mate with the shipwrecked hero. This implied bestiality was too much even for pre-code audiences. The film was rejected by 14 local censorship boards in the United States and banned outright in Britain until 1958. H.G. Wells himself hated the adaptation, calling it vulgar and sensationalistic. Island of Lost Souls effectively disappeared from circulation for decades. Its themes of unethical scientific experimentation, cruelty to animals, and blasphemy made it difficult to show even after censorship standards relaxed. Modern viewers recognize it as a horror masterpiece with groundbreaking makeup effects and a genuinely disturbing atmosphere that still unsettles audiences today. The film demonstrates how science fiction and horror could be used to explore taboo subjects in ways that realistic dramas couldn't. 13. Blonde Venus, 1932. Marlene Dietrich's Descent. Directed by Josef von Sternberg, this melodrama stars Marlene Dietrich as a wife who returns to her former career as a cabaret performer and eventually becomes a prostitute to pay for her husband's medical treatment. The film follows her moral descent without clear condemnation, showing her finding success and glamour in her new life, before ultimately being redeemed. The film's most famous sequence has Dietrich performing in a gorilla suit, which she removes to reveal a glittering costume underneath, and bizarre combination of primal sexuality and exotic glamour that typified von Sternberg's fetishistic camera work. The Production Code Administration particularly objected to the film portraying prostitution as a viable career choice for a woman in desperate circumstances. While Blonde Venus wasn't completely banned, it faced significant censorship when the code was enforced. In subsequent years, scenes implying Dietrich's character worked as a prostitute were edited out, leaving plot holes and confusion. The film represents the sophisticated European sensibility that Dietrich and von Sternberg brought to Hollywood, which frequently clashed with American moral standards. When the code clamped down, this type of morally ambiguous European-style filmmaking became impossible in Hollywood. 14. The Monkeykeys Paw, 1933. Horror too disturbing to show. Based on the famous short story by W. W. Jacobs, this RKO horror film tells the story of a cursed monkey's paw that grants 3 wishes, but with terrible consequences. The most controversial aspect was the climactic scene where a grieving mother wishes her dead son back to life, only for him to return as a mangled corpse, slowly shuffling toward their home. The film's original ending reportedly showed the resurrected son in gruesome detail, with visible injuries from the factory accident that killed him. Test audiences were so disturbed that the studio reshot the ending to make it more ambiguous, showing only a shadow approaching the house before the father uses the final wish to send him back to the grave. Even with the modified ending, The Monkey's Paw was considered too disturbing for many viewers. When the production code was enforced, horror films faced particular scrutiny for potentially lowering the moral standards of audiences. The film demonstrates the limits of what was acceptable even in the relatively permissive pre-code era. Especially in the horror genre, where filmmakers pushed boundaries of taste and decency under the guise of providing thrills and chills. 15. The 15th Last Temptation of Christ, 1988. Religious controversy. While most of our banned films come from Hollywood's golden age, this much later example shows how religious content remained controversial long after the production code was abandoned. Martin Scorsese's adaptation of Nikos Kazantzakis' novel portrays Jesus Christ, Willem Dafoe, as a conflicted man who experiences human doubts, fears, and desires, including a hallucinated sequence where he imagines leaving the cross to marry Mary Magdalene. Though made decades after the Hays Code was replaced by the current rating system, The Last Temptation of Christ faced censorship reminiscent of the earlier era. The film was banned in several countries and met with organized protests across America. Theaters received bomb threats, and one French cinema was actually set on fire during a screening, injuring 13 people. Universal Pictures initially canceled the film's release due to the controversy, then reversed course but limited it to only a few hundred theaters nationwide. Many major theater chains refused to show it, effectively censoring the film through market pressure rather than government action. The controversy demonstrates how religious content remained a flashpoint for censorship even in the modern era, with economic forces replacing formal bans as the method of suppression. 16. The Moon is Blue, 1953. The film that broke the code. This light romantic comedy directed by Otto Preminger seems tame by today's standards, but it made history by being the first major Hollywood film released without production code approval since the system was established. The controversy centered around the use of words like virgin, seduction, and pregnant, which the code specifically prohibited. Preminger and United Artists decided to release the film without the production code seal, gambling that audiences would attend anyway. The gamble paid off. The film was a box office success despite, or perhaps because of, the controversy. The Catholic Legion of Decency condemned the film, and it was banned in several cities. But court challenges to these bans were increasingly successful. The Moon is Blue marked the beginning of the end for the production code. Its commercial success, despite lacking the seal of approval, demonstrated that the system was losing its power. The Supreme Court had ruled in 1952 that films were protected by the First Amendment, undermining the legal basis for censorship. Within a few years, more filmmakers would follow Preminger's lead, and by the 1960s, the code was increasingly ignored before being formally replaced by the rating system in 1968. 17. The Miracle, 1948. The Supreme Court Case. Roberto Rossellini's short Italian film tells the story of a simple-minded peasant woman who believes she has met Saint Joseph, is given wine that makes her drowsy, and is sexually assaulted by him. She later discovers she is pregnant and believes it to be a miracle, facing ridicule from her community. When The Miracle was imported to the United States in 1950, it faced immediate controversy. The Catholic Church condemned it as blasphemous, and the New York State Board of Regents revoked the exhibition license for the theater showing it, calling the film sacrilegious. Distributor Joseph Burston sued, taking the case all the way to the Supreme Court. In a landmark 1952 decision, the Supreme Court unanimously ruled in Burston v. Wilson that the New York censorship law was unconstitutional. The court overturned its previous 1915 ruling, declaring that motion pictures were entitled to First Amendment protection as a form of free speech and artistic expression. This legal victory fundamentally changed film censorship in America, setting the stage for the eventual collapse of the production code system and establishing constitutional protection for cinema that continues today. 18. Salt of the Earth, 1954. blacklisted filmmaking. This independent film about a miners' strike in New Mexico was made by blacklisted Hollywood professionals who had been targeted during the McCarthy era for alleged communist sympathies. The film portrays labor organizing and workers' rights positively, with a particular focus on the role of women in the strike. Though it contained no explicit sexual content or violence, Salt of the Earth faced perhaps the most comprehensive suppression of any American film. Major Hollywood studios refused to distribute it. Laboratories wouldn't process the film. Projectionists were ordered not to show it, and theaters were threatened with retaliation if they screened it. The film's cast and crew were harassed during production, with some deported under suspicious circumstances. Only 13 theaters in the entire country showed Salt of the Earth upon its release, effectively burying it. This case demonstrates how political content could be censored through industry pressure and intimidation rather than official government action. The film was essentially erased from American cinema history until the 1960s, when it was rediscovered and recognized as a pioneering work of independent, socially conscious filmmaking. Its suppression reveals how Hollywood's blacklist functioned as an unofficial censorship system targeting political ideas rather than moral content. 19. Peeping Tom, 1960. Career-ending controversy. This British psychological thriller, directed by Michael Powell, focuses on a serial killer who murders women while filming their dying expressions, using a camera with a spike attached to its tripod. The film explores voyeurism, pornography, and the relationship between cinema and violence in ways that were decades ahead of its time. When Peeping Tom was released in the UK, critics were outraged, calling it depraved, perverted, and disgusting. It was pulled from theaters after just a week. The controversy effectively ended Powell's distinguished career in British cinema, despite his earlier classics like The Red Shoes and Black Narcissus. The film was barely released in the United States and then disappeared for nearly 2 decades until filmmakers like Martin Scorsese championed its rediscovery in the late 1970s. Now considered a masterpiece of psychological horror, Peeping Tom suffered not from official censorship, but from critical revulsion so intense that it functioned as effective suppression. The film's rehabilitation demonstrates how critical opinion can shift dramatically over time, with yesterday's depraved trash becoming today's misunderstood masterpiece. 20. Reefer Madness, 1936. Propaganda becomes parody. Originally titled Tell Your Children, this exploitation film was intended as a serious warning about the dangers of marijuana use. The film depicts teenagers who smoke marijuana and subsequently descend into madness, murder, suicide, and rape, all from a few puffs of cannabis. While not technically banned, Reefer Madness effectively disappeared from circulation after its initial release. It was rediscovered in the 1970s by marijuana advocates who showed it at college campuses as an unintentional comedy, laughing at its over-the-top portrayal of cannabis effects. The film gained cult status as possibly the least accurate drug education film ever made. Reefer Madness represents a different kind of censorship, the suppression of accurate information about drugs in favor of hysterical propaganda. The film was part of a broader campaign that helped justify the criminalization of marijuana, with racist undertones targeting Mexican immigrants and African-American jazz musicians who were associated with cannabis use. Its transformation from serious warning to camp comedy mirrors society's evolving understanding of marijuana's actual effects. 21st. The Pawnbroker, 1964. Breaking the Nudity Taboo. Sidney Lumet's Holocaust drama stars Rod Steiger as a concentration camp survivor running a pawn shop in Harlem. The film includes brief scenes of female nudity in both a flashback to the concentration camps and in a contemporary setting. While tame by modern standards, these scenes directly challenged one of the production code's most absolute prohibitions. The Production Code Administration initially refused to approve the film, but director Lumet and producer Ely Landau argued that the nudity was essential to the story and not exploitative. In a landmark decision, the PCA granted an exception, allowing the pawnbroker to receive approval despite the nudity. This special dispensation created a precedent that quickly led to more nudity in mainstream films. The pawnbroker represents the beginning of the code's collapse from within, as administrators began granting more exceptions for artistic merit. Within a few years, the entire system would be abandoned in favor of the rating system we know today. The film demonstrates how changing social attitudes and persistent challenges from filmmakers eventually undermined even the most rigid censorship systems. 22. I Am Curious, Yellow. 1967. Foreign film testing boundaries. This Swedish film combines political documentary techniques with explicit sexual content, following a young woman exploring both radical politics and sexual liberation. When it was imported to the United States in 1968, customs officials seized it as obscene, leading to a court battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court. Though the court ultimately allowed the film to be shown by a 4-4 split decision, I Am Curious, Yellow, faced ongoing legal challenges in various states and cities. Despite, or because of, the controversy, it became one of the highest-grossing foreign films in American history, with curious viewers lining up around the block at art house theaters. The film's importation coincided with the final collapse of the production code system and its replacement with the MPAA rating system in 1968. I Am Curious, Yellow, exemplified how foreign films had increasingly challenged American censorship standards throughout the 1950s and 60s, creating pressure for a more flexible system that could accommodate adult-oriented content. Its case demonstrates how court decisions, changing social attitudes, and economic incentives combined to transform film censorship in America. 23rd. The Kiss, 1896. The first censored film. One of the earliest films ever made to face censorship was Thomas Edison's 18-second short, showing actors May Irwin and John Rice kissing, recreating a scene from their Broadway play. By modern standards, the brief peck appears completely innocent, but in 1896, public displays of affection were considered inappropriate for mass viewing. Religious leaders and newspaper editorials condemned the kiss as shocking and obscene. The Roman Catholic Church called for censorship, and some towns prohibited its showing. While never officially banned nationwide, this tiny film sparked the first debate about cinematic morality that would eventually lead to formal censorship systems. The Kiss demonstrates how standards of acceptable content have shifted dramatically over time. What once scandalized audiences is now considered completely innocent. The controversy surrounding this brief film planted the seeds for over a century of debate about what should be permitted on screen and who should make those decisions. From this humble beginning, an entire censorship apparatus would eventually develop to control what audiences could see. 24th. Hexen, 1922. Witchcraft documentary. This Swedish-Danish silent film combines documentary and dramatic reconstruction to explore the history of witchcraft and how medieval superstition led to the persecution of women. Director Benjamin Christensen included explicit scenes of torture, nudity, and sacrilege that shocked audiences worldwide. Hexen was banned in the United States and heavily censored elsewhere. The film shows nude witches, demons tempting monks, women giving birth to demons, and graphic torture of accused witches. While presented in an educational context, the film's vivid imagery was deemed too disturbing for public viewing in many countries. The film represents how even educational or historical content could face censorship if it contained disturbing imagery. Hexen disappeared from circulation for decades before being rediscovered and appreciated for its groundbreaking blend of documentary and horror techniques. Modern critics recognize it as a feminist critique of religious persecution disguised as a sensationalistic exploration of the occult, demonstrating how complex messages could be hidden within controversial packaging. 25. The Birth of a Nation, 1915. Racial propaganda. D.W. Griffith's technically innovative but morally repugnant epic portrays the Civil War and Reconstruction from a white Southern perspective, depicting Black Americans, many played by white actors in blackface, as unintelligent and sexually aggressive. The film infamously portrays the Ku Klux Klan as heroic saviors restoring order to the South. Upon its release, the NAACP led protests against the film in many cities, resulting in riots and violence in some locations. Several states and cities banned or censored it, but these efforts were piecemeal and ultimately unsuccessful in stopping its wide distribution. President Woodrow Wilson screened it at the White House, giving it a presidential endorsement that increased its legitimacy. The Birth of a Nation demonstrated the real-world harm that inflammatory film content could cause, as KKK membership surged after its release. The controversy surrounding the film helped establish the principle that movies had power to influence society for good or ill, becoming a central justification for the censorship systems that followed. Unlike other banned films that challenged sexual mores or religious sensibilities, The Birth of a Nation faced opposition for its hateful racial content, a distinction that reveals the priorities of early censorship efforts, which were often more concerned with sexual propriety than with racist propaganda.